So let's dive into how you can find the desire in whatever story you are telling.
We've got some examples for you as well. So here are some common questions that we would ask. Now, we would do these in a pre interview. So, when I mentioned to you before about the man I was talking to in Afghanistan, these are the kind of questions you'd want to start with. So, what's your big dream for the next year? How does this fulfill a personal goal or passion for you? Beyond the product, service, cause, whatever it is, what kind of impact do you hope this
You can
creates?
imagine when we asked Zelwyn that, right? Like beyond magic, what is the impact we actually want to have? And then he would dive into kids and how how they're filled with wonder and how he wants to create that. And right away, you're like, wow, you'd feel him come alive and you know you're onto something.
And then it goes down to narrowing, if you can narrow it down to one word, what's this really about for you? And then finally, for all the hours, sweat, and tears you've put into this, it's all for the sake of what? So you can see how these questions, they're actually opening up for a discussion. It's not a yes or no answer. It's actually opening up for someone to tell you something a bit more about them that you wouldn't really share when you first meet someone and have a kind of courteous handshake. How you doing? Yep, let's do this project together. These are the kind of questions you can ask, and there are many others too that we're going to go through today that really open up that discussion around desire.
So here's some questions that you can use. But beyond that, we have three techniques we're going to share. Three techniques or exercises that you can actually do with people that help you go deeper. Because what doesn't work is, hey, Max, what's your desire? Right? It doesn't work. And what we have to remember is that an easy story is rarely remarkable, and a remarkable story is rarely easy. That resistance that you have to go through is how you find the gold, is how you find something that nobody else found. Right? So we have to be ready to try different things to find this stuff. So for the next one, can we get a volunteer named Ethan to come up? Would that work? Okay. So our first technique is called the five
Doing
whys. You're looking at Maddie. You're
Yeah,
you're
you're
the
my
character.
friend.
We're telling your story.
This is your story. So I'm going to ask you a question, and the question is, why are you a filmmaker?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Just whatever comes to mind. Don't force it. Just whatever comes to mind.
I had a friend who committed suicide in 2010, and I recognized that he had a narrative in his head, and because of that narrative, he made a decision. So I kind of realized the power of narrative and the power of story,
Mhm.
and it led to me becoming a filmmaker.
And why did that
Why?
matter to you?
Because if he would have had a positive narrative in his head,
Mhm.
he wouldn't have made that decision. So I feel like being a filmmaker and creating those positive narratives can reverse someone's decision to, change their life.
Why do you want
Mhm.
to reverse or change decisions?
Um, because it would save someone's life, really.
Yeah.
Can
And
make a large impact.
Yeah.
why is that impact important then? You can take your time. It's okay.
You can see in just a couple questions, we start getting a lot deeper, and
Yeah.
his struggle is real.
Yeah.
Like he hasn't, these are things that we haven't often thought about, right? And now Ethan has thought about it a lot more than most of us have, because most of us wouldn't come up here and right away say, "Oh, well, my friend committed suicide, and this is what it led to." Most of us would say, "Well, I like to make movies. I like cameras. I like to," we would start kind of there. But as we go down, we start getting a lot deeper, and we'll get to the place of the thing that he wants to actually create, and we'll get to that actual desire. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. No
Thank
problem.
you.
And thanks for being so open.
Awesome. He kind of nailed it. So the exercise here is with the discussion, when you first meet your characters, you ask them why. And if you noticed, every time Ethan said something, we were listening to what he was saying and then asking, well, why? Why is impact important? Why do you care about that narrative? And fortunately, Ethan's really switched on to why he does what he does. So congratulations to you for knowing your purpose. But here you can see how just asking why gets that person to get past just the initial answer.
So, that makes sense? You see how we can apply that? One of the biggest mistakes a lot of us will make, that's yours, I'll give it back to you. What a lot of us do is we just ask the first question and then we move on. So, what do you love to do? I'm a magician. Oh, cool. When did that start? When I was a kid. Oh, cool. What do your parents think? And we just move on, right? As opposed to going, well, no, 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 but why? And so it's staying with it and going deeper. Number two is the story map. And the idea here is that you're just going to create like a simple chart, and it would just be time, what they're doing, and what it means. You're going to work with your character to just figure out what they do from the moment they wake up to when they sleep. You're just going to get very, very detailed. Now, this comes from a lot of our methods come from anthropology, come from the practice of ethnography or participant observation, which just means being with the people, right? So if you want to really know or understand something, you'd hang out with the mortgage broker. Like you'd actually go as he meets with people, as he trains agents, as he might try and sell a house. Like you'd actually be with them. So that's where these techniques come from. And when we do the story map, what you're trying to do is go the entire way through the day. What happens sometimes when you kind of make this chart is we separate what happens versus what it means. We start developing the ability to separate our observation and our interpretation. Those often happen at the same time. You're trying to separate that, right? So what do I see, which is what's happening. So we did this once with somebody, and it's like you find stuff that you never would imagine. We did a piece on a girl who makes bike wheels. We're like, okay, well, just take us through your day. Oh, I get into work at 10. Well, no. Like, when do you wake up? 4:45. Oh, well, that's interesting. Why? Because I like to medicate my front yard like as the sun's coming up. Like right away, that says something, right? So the key then is to put down the observation and later then look at the interpretations. Write down the whole day and then look at what you can see. And so as we did this with the Jude from Sugar Wheel Works, we started to see she had this great connection to her community. It was really like the meditation, the biking to work, like creating bike wheels was about being in and with people. And that helped us see what her desire really was. It wasn't making custom bike wheels, it was people and community, right? So just start by asking people, taking them through the day, and they will skip things. They will say, well, like you start work at 9 and then I leave at 5 and I go home and have dinner. That's what they're gonna start with. Like, what time do you go to bed? What do you do before bed? Like all the way through, and you will find these really interesting things about people, and that suggests who they are and what they want.
We have a question. Who's our friend over there?
Our friend James again. When you say be with them in your story map, do you shadow them? Do you film them right away? Or do you just follow them and take notes? Is this in the interview? Like
Yeah,
what
so-
about that process?
So when you're creating a story map, we would talk to them. So you're interviewing them and you're asking questions. The idea of shadowing them and participant observation is sharing where these techniques come from. It comes from the philosophy or the mindset of ethnography. So and the next technique as well, very much so. So when you want to study a culture as an anthropologist, you go and live there for sometimes years, right? To really understand people. You live with them for years. We're trying to take inspiration from that and create techniques that put you in with people. And so it's an interview that gives you just filling out that chart, but saying, I really want to know everything that happens from this time to this time. And then you can kind of ask questions, you can see things, and you can pull out your observations. Yeah,
So this is during the pre-interview stage.
yes. This is all during the pre-interview stage.
And that kind of relates back to what we spoke about at the beginning, right? We want to be spending a lot of that time in pre-production because that is key to our story. That's key to what we're creating. That sets up everything else. And so that kind of leads, oh, Nora. Hello, friend.
I've worked in documentary film a while, and what I found also is in the pre-interview, is there a way that you don't ask too deep of questions? Because I notice sometimes people don't answer as thoroughly the second time because you already asked them, so they're thinking in their head, oh, you already know this story, so let me shorten it.
Yeah. So I think it's a challenge when you do more pre-production and you get really deep with people that you then want it to be original and novel, right? So a couple things. One is you can have somebody on your team do the pre-interviews. So Maddie and I work really well because she'll be the producer that will do all the pre-interviews, whereas I'll be the director that actually do the interviews. So that creates a separation where it's like, you know, Zelwyn, I heard about this thing and I'd love to hear it from you. Everything is a conversation though, not a performance. Not like, hey, can you recite that thing you told me? Because that just doesn't get anything deep or authentic out of people. The other thing is to think about additional questions that go deeper or add in details, right? And so like, if you were talking to Zelwyn and in pre-production, you found that story of the conflict and like him getting kicked out. We know we want that for our story. So how do we go back in and talk about it? We could start by kind of going, you know, do you remember like what day it was? Like, what can you tell me about that moment? And I didn't ask him about that before. And he's naturally going to kind of bring us into that story. So find other ways to go at it. And that seems to help a lot too. When you're tapping into real things to people, it's easy for them to talk about it again too.
And that kind of leads in then to our next point. Listen to the walls. And so this relates as well if we look at our lead anthropologist on our team, Ivy. So Ivy, when she walks into a space, we'll send her out before we put together a story. And she will spend time sitting on a bus with someone who's going through a health issue, talking to them about their experience on a bus, in the field with them. Or she'll go to a picnic where they're all hanging out at and interact with them and see. And so listen to the walls is something that you would do in that environment when you walk into your character's home for the first time, into their office for the first time. And if we want to do a little exercise here, if we look at what we just watched, Selwyn's story, what are some of the things that you noticed, some of the objects that you noticed around his home environment when we were shooting in there?
And what we're doing again, like the story map, is it's observation versus interpretation. So we go into space, and what do we find that's interesting? And then we step back later and go, what do we think this means? So were there any things that you saw in Zelwyn's space that was interesting? In the kitchen, in his bedroom, in any of those things? Yeah. So that's the observation. Our interpretation of the food and everything else was they lived simply. They didn't have a lot of means, which is tied into the desire and how hard it was, right? Like it was a big family in a small house living simply.
And so the point is here, we go in, we listen to the walls, and we separate the objects we see. The objects we see that actually are interesting. And so you can use, your own interest yourself when you walk in for the first time. What sticks out the most to you? What is the weirdest thing? We did a piece with Chris Darwin, and he had all of these.
The great-great-grandson of Charles Darwin.
Yes. And he had all this artwork in his house of watercolored birds, watercolored plants. And so immediately we're looking at this and we see this artwork and we connect that to his desire and his connection with the environment, right? So you can do that with your characters. Look at the object and then what does it mean?
In Zelwyn's room, he had hundreds of DVDs that were all magic, right? So that'd be an observation. We go, wow, I don't have this many movies. This guy's got, and they're all magic from all over the world. What does that say to you, So that's what you're looking for. If you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, he talks about how you can look at somebody's bedroom and in an instant, you can know more about them than talking to them for hours. That's the idea, right? You're getting into their actual spaces and making observations because that is going to be a big clue as to who they are and what they want. Okay, so we've got the questions. We can do a story map. We can do this idea of listening to the walls. All of that is about finding things and patterns in people and finding the desire. And then we can also do the 5 whys and just keep asking them and going deeper and deeper and deeper until we find out what that all is. Ideally, as you do different techniques, they'll line up, right? Like somebody is going to leave the same trace. The 5 whys is going to leave you to this wonder and magic with Zelwyn, and you're going to see all of that in his room and everything else. So you should start seeing a resonance that all of these different things are pointing back to the same thing.
Does anyone have anything on their mind?
Anything about desire before we move on?
What if somebody doesn't really have, they have a 75% desire?
Cut them.
Find someone else.
What if it's a client that you've already signed on with? That's
Cut them.
just cut?
Well, your challenge is to find people that have strong desire because that's what's going to get people to feel something. If you start making films of weak characters, you're going to attract other people that are okay with that standard and see that and want that. And you're not going to be able to raise your rates or do anything, like that. So we want to be careful. Is there somebody that's 1 degree of separation from that person? The family members, you're looking for another perspective. That's the best way you can do it. And then you're going to try and do all you can, whatever the desire is. If you're doing a wedding, and you're stuck with the couple, you can still look at other people at the wedding, but how do I most make their desire come out? A lot of what we showed in Zelwyn's film was also highlighting the moments and the things that brought his desire forward. So whatever it is, use that, use those things that best show it as a way of helping connect us to what they want.
If you are concerned about managing client expectations in that moment, because that can sometimes be an awkward conversation, the best thing you can do is really thorough pre-production research, story research, and research with as many people as you can, so that when you go back to your client, you can go with some really strong stories to present that desire. And your case is quite clear then, right? Because if you put story first in that instance, the result of their final product, the quality and the connection that their audience member is going to have with it is significantly different.
Let's define the objective, then let's look at how to best get there. And just completely remove it as a yes or no or anything. It's just like, we're not there. I need to talk to people. We'll come back to that in our last section.
And you can focus that conversation around education, so bringing them up to speed, but then also collaborating so that they can also feel a part of the process. So you're teaching them why you're doing what you're doing, and then that's going to give them the buy-in. So you can say, yeah, we're doing that because the desire is not there, and that directly relates to our audience retention or our audience's connection with the piece. So if you bring them through it, you're kind of making the decision with them. I think Justin has a story.
Joshua, I was wondering, is there a way you found to bring a desire out of your subject? You know it's there, but they don't know it. They don't know it yet.
So the 5 whys technique is how you help people find things that they don't know, as are the listening to the walls in the story map. You start seeing things that, they might not have sat down and recognized that I do my filmmaking because I believe I can make a positive change and I want to, shift somebody's life. But as you work with them, they can come to that. And that is, the mark of a great storyteller, is they see something more than the characters in the film did. We're seeing something greater and we're connecting dots. So you want to be a facilitator to helping people find these things, because they didn't wake up this morning going, well, I know exactly why I do this and everything I've done, and let me just hand it to you on a platter to make the film. Yeah.
So then relating this to like the business side, it seems like it's a lot more. We were talking about that chart and doing more pre-production. I feel like a lot of clients are like, well, we're used to spending more of our money, here on the production side or the post. You almost sell this as like, the more we do in pre-production, the cheaper your post is going to be.
So I would start with the objective. Always start with the end in mind, right? So what does your client want to do? Give me an example.
They want to get more people to sign up, or more admissions for their school.
So we've got a client that wants more admissions to their school, right? And they've got, let's say they have a $20,000 budget. Now I can take that $20,000 budget and I can use it overshooting stuff I don't really know I need, and then going through endless revisions in post to give you something that's going to get a couple admissions. Or we can take that budget, we actually do a lot of research, and I can create something that's far more strategic and will guarantee that we're getting a 5 to 10 times ROI versus the other version. You're going to spend the same amount. It's whether you want more admissions. Which one do you want?
More admissions.
Well, there you go. That's exactly how I talk to them, right? End in mind, though. It's not about any of that. It doesn't matter. It's what you're trying to achieve and how the strategic development is going to get that, right? If I just spend all the time in production and I don't have something that connects people and engages them, then nobody watches and nobody applies.
And that can also be the really unique thing about you and your business too. That's attractive to a client, right?